Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. Go to the link right here in the description. Bypass the Apple upcharge. All of a sudden, you're in there. You'd just be diving into a pool with thousands of other angry Heat fans. What could sound better than that? $2.99 per month. Link right here in the description. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. It includes Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE. Put down $5. You'll get $50 to play right away across the sports spectrum. It is legal in the state of Florida. This is our official fantasy partner. Use the code FIVE, prizepicks.com. And now, today's episode. All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan on a groggy Sunday morning after the Miami Heat get absolutely destroyed at home by a tanking team. They came into the game 5-5 without Jimmy Butler. I think that one should count for 10 losses. That's one of the worst performances I've ever seen live. And we will get into that in other episodes, but today we're going to get into where the Miami Heat could possibly go from here. I actually had someone, and our guest today, our floor plan, is Evan Cohen. You know him from down here in the West Palm Beach area. He hosts Unsportsmanlike on ESPN Radio and basically every place else that ESPN gets to. But we bring you on here, and I've done shows with you over the years, but we bring you on here basically because you are a walking spreadsheet when it comes to this stuff. And I don't have Andy available, so we're going to go to you on this. Let me just get to this again. We'll get into the game and what happened last night and everything else. But how much time do you typically devote to coming up with scenarios on the trade machine?
Well, since first of all, thank you for having me. As I've told you and I've told Greg, like I love what you guys do. I listen all the time. I've been up since 5 in the morning this morning. I already listened to last night's post game show where you guys just, I mean, if people haven't heard it, it is really a Terry Rozier love fest, is what it is. I mean, I think his agent would really enjoy that show. But seriously, I love what you guys do. So a lot of times, what I'll do is you guys will say something or Windy will say something, or Bontemps or McMahon will say something. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Let me play around with this because I moved to South Florida in 2003. I was never a Knicks fan growing up. For whatever reason, I mean, like you, we're both from New York, but like, I don't know, the Knicks just never turned me on at that point as an organization. And you and I know each other well enough, but for the audience, like I'm really turned on by great management and structure of organizations. Like I love studying what the Patriots and the Spurs and the Warriors and now the Chiefs and the Steelers and all these teams do. And the Heat are right there, like right there. So anytime I hear any kind of rumor like that, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Let me see what the Heat could do with this. But the last 2 days has been pathetic. I mean, it's hours. Literally 5 in the morning this morning. I'm like, who have I not put Jimmy in a trade to? And I love Jimmy. I'm not going to speak negatively. I don't think you nor Greg have spoken negatively about him on your pod. I think it's unfortunate the way it's ending. That's kind of how I'm looking at this. As I thought he was going to ride off into the sunset, play his way into an extension, not for the same money, but play his
Right.
way into an extension. Then when he's done playing basketball, I never thought he was going to be Udonis or Zoe, but I thought he would be front row as a heckler with DJ Khaled and enjoy and like seriously and enjoy the time in and around Miami. And I'm actually sad for the guy because he's a nomad for his career. He will have no home unless he wins a championship in that next stop.
No, that's true. I mean, we talk about Kevin Durant being a nomad, but at least Durant did win in Golden State, even if he doesn't get the credit for it necessarily from the general public who thinks he latched on when actually he was the best player in those finals and all the rest of it. It doesn't matter to a lot of people. The fact that you've been up since 5, I appreciate that because I was sleeping. I was passed out. In fact, Evan had to DM me like, where do I log on? And I saw that 14 minutes after I logged out of sleep. But we're gonna get to the trade deadline stuff in a moment. I'm glad the trade option stuff in a second. But I'm glad that you mentioned kind of where you stand on the Jimmy thing because again, when we start talking about trading him and where to trade him, none of this had to happen right
No,
now.
no.
And that's what I was saying, and what I think the Heat were prepared to do was sit down with him after the season, after they saw how it played out, how available he was, whether or not he could still raise the team ceiling when it mattered. And then, sit down with them and maybe try to get an extension of a little bit greater length at a little bit less per year. Now, they never made that offer to his camp. I want to be clear on that. So, I mean, in fairness, they don't, there was no certainty about any of that, but that was my belief based on my conversations with them. And obviously, that went off the table, and it kind of became a game between two people who were separating, who were in a relationship, and it was like, no, I'm not going to sign the extension now. It's like, no, you didn't give me the wedding ring when I wanted it, so now I don't care what it is, I'm not taking it, and it just honestly has become kind of a childish game between the two parties.
I agree, but I will say this for Heat fans, I think that two things can be true. There's no need to badmouth Jimmy. And the
Mhm,
second thing is understand every business in every walk of life. The goal is ultimately to say no. And what do I mean by that? You're so good at what you do and you're so structured and you have such a good plan that when you have an employee in this case who in your mind is asking for too much, even if they've been amazing, that you're so good as a business to have the ability to say, I'm sorry, we can't do that because we believe in ourselves and our structure that we can recreate this. Now, whether that's true or not, we're going to find out. But there's
mhm,
two massive examples of organizations saying no when everyone else says yes. The Warriors with Clay and the Heat with Jimmy. Now, you can
mhm,
argue whether or not that they are going to work out, but they have won more recently than any of the other organizations in this sport, right? I mean, San Antonio, yes, but we're talking about a different era. I'm talking about since LeBron went to Miami, we're talking about the Heat and the Warriors as the two most successful organizations, in my opinion, in each conference. And they both have the most famous no's where all of these other teams are like, yes, sure, we'll do this, we'll do that. And I think the Heat fan should be proud of the organization in some way. And there's so much drama and misperception, Ethan. You know this better than anybody about so many of these things. Like the idea of, well, they really screwed over Wade. Well, if you love Jimmy and you want Jimmy here, you can't then say they screwed over Wade because they never would have traded Wade. By
mhm,
passing on Wade and using Whiteside for that salary slot, you have the opportunity to get Jimmy Butler. They were never going to trade Dwayne Wade for Jimmy Butler, and there was no way of doing it otherwise. So I still think the faith in the organization, in them saying no, should be there. Like that is an important part of this. They said no to Shaq. They ultimately got LeBron. They said no to Wade. They ultimately got Jimmy. Now they're saying no to Jimmy. I believe they're ultimately going to get someone else. It's ugly on the way out. I heard George with you yesterday. There's certainly blame everywhere around. And the blame I thought was interesting you and George talked about. The blame with Jimmy is not to, is with the organization, in
mhm.
essence, was not to shock everyone this summer and out of nowhere trade him,
Right.
right? Because that would have been the move looking back on it. But then the organization would have been ripped for being too cold towards Jimmy. So they allowed Jimmy to get rid of them instead of them getting rid of him.
Yeah, it does. It does sound like a relationship where it is. No, it's not you, it's me.
Right.
So everybody feels better about it, but nobody ultimately feels good about it. But I get what you're saying there with a lot with the saying no because uh, you know the Heat fan always wants the next star. They found it really challenging to get another star with the salary structure the way it is and everything else going on in the NBA. And if they had paid Jimmy, which again I was open to, okay, but if they had paid Jimmy, the odds are the chances of them getting somebody else to pair with him, they were diminished. And so
Let me
again,
go
I
there
get
for
their
1 second,
philosophy
though.
on it. I do agree with George because George did text me, and George likes to say he's right. But I will, because George a long time too. But I will say I went back and looked at his text that night after Pat made his comments, and he was like, they got to get rid of him now. And he didn't mean that in the sense of, oh, he's a horrible player
Anti-Jimmy.
or
It
anything.
was over.
It was over. And
Right.
and
But
so
you just
that's
said,
what it
Ethan,
was.
you just said something very interesting. And again, I don't want this to come off as bad mouthing Jimmy. I want this to come off as retro, like looking back at Jimmy's career and thinking about something. Because I've been thinking about this.
Mhm.
The build with Jimmy, you guys talk about it a lot, and you kind of use the Jimmy build, I think is how you guys
Mhm.
refer to it a lot.
Mhm.
There's no other superstar with him. Let's dissect that for a second. Is Jimmy Butler on the Miami Heat capable of not being the best player on the team? Because in order to get the superstar he wants, theoretically, he would then
Mhm.
have to not be the best player on the team. But if you look back at his career, who are the people that he really struggled with? Andrew Wiggins, number one overall pick. Karl Anthony Towns, number one overall pick. Ben Simmons, number one overall pick. If you don't come from the mud, he can't work with you. And that's one of the things that I loved about this Heat group is that they all came from the mud. I actually believe it's going to be easier to get a superstar player since when he's gone than when he was here. And I don't mean that as a knock on him. I mean,
Mhm.
stylistically, Bam was awful last night. We know that. But Bam is someone that is not made up to be the best all around, both ways player on the team. Neither is Tyler. So they have an opening for a best player on the team. And I think both of those two guys will be understanding towards whoever that becomes one day as the two-way best player on the team. And I don't think like Dame Lillard arguably would have become the best player on the team. And I don't know that Jimmy would have been okay with that because he's never been okay with that otherwise. He's
Mhm.
always been okay with the development of the stars like Bam and Tyler because he knows he's the best player. And the only moment in his Heat career where he was not treated like the best player on the team was this year.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he wanted out.
And Evan, no, it's such a good point because I love the way you stated there because he has constantly said, I don't need to score. I want my teammates to get involved. And then what supposedly triggered this with him at the end, at least according to those around him, was that essentially the first 6 minutes of the Pelicans game, he was watching Tyler and Duncan do their thing and Bam shoot mid-range jumpers and just threw up his hands. It can't be both ways.
And I
Okay.
don't think he should
And
be the
by the
second
way,
best
Evan,
player in the Heat.
by the way, Evan, they dispute that whole thing. They say Spo did not send call plays for him to run to the corner. He called plays
Of
for
course not.
Jimmy. Jimmy ignored him, went to the corner. But what I'm saying is that this idea again that I just want everybody else to eat. I'm just here to fit. That's how he's portrayed it. But then when it's ultimately come down to it, he wants to be loved, and being loved is you get the ball in the key situations. We saw his body language when he wasn't getting the last shot, and sometimes he just rested the last shot and took bad last shots. I'm not saying he didn't make some, but he did that because again, he wanted those moments at the end of the game. He is so fraught with contradictions in the way that he expresses himself and speaks, and a lot of it I think is intentional. He's contrarian by nature. He also really didn't develop any relationship with any of the local media, unlike the other stars, and so he doesn't have an advocate right now, which I think is unfair because I do know that that stuff colors the way that, and I'm trying to avoid all of that. But look, LeBron would do two media availabilities a day. I would do just myself. I'm not just kind of, I would do 10 to 20 one-on-ones with LeBron during a year. I never did one with Jimmy.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying me, I'm saying he didn't do them with anybody. I was talking to a couple of the other media guys last night, you know very well, who covered the team. They never got any. And I think again, it's difficult in those situations to gain an understanding of the way someone thinks if everything is if it's infrequent, if it's in the group settings, if he's avoiding them and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think at this point it's hard to kind of understand Jimmy's point of view because you don't really understand Jimmy, except that Jimmy's always going to take the point of view that nobody wants him to take because that's just the way his mind works. And
Yeah.
the thing about the mud and coming out of the mud is really interesting because again, he wanted stars to play with him. But who did he relate the best to? Like he wanted Max to
Bruce.
stay,
Yeah.
right? The team he took to the finals, it was Gabe, it was Max, it was exact. And who did he not want the Heat to let go of? PJ Tucker, who was the ultimate get out of the mud guy.
Now he
Okay,
loves Jovic, who's about 12 years old and, had barely graduated high school, right?
right.
Who's from another country. Even Kyle Lowry, who, has had a decorated career and is a champion. And when he retires, I don't know that he's getting in the Hall of Fame, but people in Toronto will say he deserves consideration. Fine, whatever. We're not going to, like, there's no need to badmouth him.
Mm.
He bounced around before he really had that home in Toronto. Like, he's somewhat out of the mud. And by the way, Jimmy was brought to Miami to be the best player. And I think he lived up to those expectations with flying colors. I think he was absolutely the best player and did an unbelievable job. And barring like unforeseen, like these circumstances are awful. And he should have had his jersey retired one day, and he may have ruined that, which stinks. Like I think we brought up Durant. I think Durant is more loved in Oklahoma City long term than Jimmy will be in Miami. As sad as that sounds, because that's and Golden State for that matter. I think they have an easier time kissing and making up than Jimmy may have with the Heat here, which is unbelievably sad. And oh, by the way, it still may not be over because I know you and Greg have talked about like it's got to be sooner rather than later. They're not going to take on bad money. They're not going to all of a sudden become stupid overnight. That's just not going to happen. I'm sorry. And there's a lot of trades and ways
No,
to
you
look
want to
at
get to it. Let's
it.
get to it.
No,
Let's
no,
get
no.
to it.
I'm glad. I appreciate you giving me the time to do the
Mhm.
other stuff because I think the Heat fan needs to understand the idea of organizations saying no and who he actually wanted to play with and whether or not he was ever willing to be the second best player on the team and whether or not he should have been willing. Because Cat, Wiggins, Simmons didn't like any of them, all number one picks. None of them came out of the mud. All right, so here's what I did for you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to let you choose your own adventure. It's your show. So I broke this down. I broke this down into categories. There are realistic. I think there's one category I think you're gonna like. Realistic returns. That's
Okay,
one category.
realistic returns. Okay. Oh, wait. I need my spreadsheet. Hold on.
Okay. Okay.
I'm very old school, Evan. I'm much older than you.
Oh no.
I use a pad of paper. There you
So
go.
do I. Everything.
Okay.
All of my show notes for Unsportsmanlike, literally, if you watch on TV on ESPN2, you could see me with a notebook every day, and they make fun of me on television because I have the notebook. Okay, so there's a realistic return.
Mhm.
This is the one I think you're gonna like. Players to continue the Jimmy build in
Okay.
place of Jimmy.
Okay. All right. So this is the Jimmy replacement to try to lift the team that has Tyler and Bam on it, but they're not
But
counted
like
on to do this.
literally in the Jimmy role and
Okay.
physically built like him in some cases.
Okay.
There's a list of players I came up with. Could they get by way of a three-way deal? There's a does it make sense? Would they ever? And do we, oh yeah, and do we believe? So you pick the category, and I'll give you some of the trades.
Oh my God. Okay. So who are you? Are you, which host are you now? I'm trying to figure out like which game show are we
Oh,
playing?
I don't know. I haven't done.
Does
I'm
it
just
what
like, you know what? Each of that come
$24,000
on.
pyramid, or was it the $1 million? Who
Choose your
wants to
own
be a
adventure.
millionaire? All right, let's. Who wants to be a millionaire? Actually, Jimmy does. Jimmy already is. Jimmy wanted to be a billionaire. All right, so it does. All right, so what do we got? Give it to me again. I'm sorry. The Jimmy build
I'll
continuation.
just go in order. All right, realistic returns. This has
Okay.
been the one that I've thought forever is going to be the one that happens, and it makes the most sense for the incoming team. And players are coming back that the Heat would like. I don't think it makes them great this year, but I think it makes them more able to make trades in the future, and that's the Memphis one. The Brandon Clark, Marcus Smart, Luke Kennard one allows Miami to have they have no trade. Like you need guys in this league that are under 20 million to
Hmm.
be able to trade to pair together to get stars in addition to the young players. That gives you a bunch of them. Marcus Smart, just on an island, is the kind of player I think, when healthy, that makes perfect sense next to Tyler. He
Hmm.
can guard the one defensively and play the two offensively. You don't want him to shoot much, but he feels heat, right? Brandon Clark, they haven't had like a real power forward in a long time, old school. And Kennard would enable you, if you're interested, and I'm not excited about this, but would enable you to with Duncan Robinson trades at that point
Right.
because he gives you another shooter for 10 million less. So that's a realistic return. Obviously, you've got to get a pick or two out of that. There's the Houston one, which I don't love, to be honest with you, especially since Jabari Smith just got hurt. But that's the Dylan Brooks, Steven Adams, Jabari Smith one. That's the
Mhm.
one that, okay, like I think Houston would be willing to. I don't know why. Memphis, if you put together that starting lineup of Morant, Bain, Jimmy, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Edie. That's a legit team all of a sudden. That makes a lot of
Mhm.
sense. So those are the realistic ones. Okay. Now this is the one I would hope you'll dive into.
Okay.
These are trades to continue the Jimmy build in place of Jimmy. Everyone's talking about Sacramento because of Fox.
Mhm.
Is there a Sacramento trade without Fox? And you literally just say DeMar DeRozan is kind of the closest thing to Jimmy Butler, and let's
Mhm.
just switch these guys. DeRozan and Herter for Jimmy Butler works financially. You kind of can run the exact same offense. Defense a little different. DeRozan obviously is not as good. He makes less. Herter, same thing in terms of Duncan, makes less, shooter, the whole deal. That let's start there. What do you think of that concept of just kind
Well,
of flip-flopping those guys?
I'll tell you that it's interesting because both players have been connected to the Heat in the past. And so in DeRozan's case, they did have interest in him. They only had the 5.2 million this offseason. They called up to Chicago to see if they'd be interested in any kind of a sign and trade possibility because basically the agent had interest in bringing DeRozan down to Miami. So they called to Chicago and they said, okay, will you actually deal with us? They said, well, we don't really want any of your players. We want picks. That wasn't going to work out, but the Heat did, and I've said this on off the floor, they did try to get involved in the three-way deal, which actually would have netted them a different player, not Herter, but Barnes, but Herter was involved in it. Potentially, and I've always heard of the possibility of Herter ending up in Miami. There are connections there, so it would not surprise me if that's what they decided to do. It's funny because of the relationship between Jimmy and DeRozan, but you're right. They have. I mean, DeRozan's a mid-range player. Now he's not made the Kings better. We know that, but I don't think that's the only reason for it. We also know about DeMar's issues in the playoffs. He ain't playoff Jimmy. But if you're trying to sell to your fans, okay, we're trying to remain competitive. And again, we get somebody who doesn't cost what Jimmy costs, and then Herter allows you, because again, the Duncan part has been attached to this, allows you to then trade Duncan somewhere else. I can see the viability in that. Now, Heat fans will freak out if you make a trade with Sacramento and you don't get Fox, but again, you have to get what you can get. So no, that's not out of the realm of possibility. And I do think it's something that they could look at. We know it's not even the first time they looked at DeMar. They looked at DeMar. We talked about it before
Yeah.
in that case. So and he's a Heat guy in a lot of ways, just in the way that he handles himself. So and he has a
Well, I think it's
relationship with
time.
Wayne too.
I
Yeah,
think his time in San Antonio would help the Heat's interest in how he handled himself there,
hmm
unbelievably professionally, moving to power
yes,
forward when he was a shooting guard his whole career. All right, the next
exactly.
one, and this is a wild one, but not
hmm
that wild. This is again under the category of players to continue the Jimmy build in place of Jimmy to Milwaukee with Josh Richardson and Alec Burks
hmm
for Chris Middleton, Bobby Portis, and Pat Connaughton.
Okay, so for Middleton.
Portis and Connaughton.
Okay.
Now, let's talk about this. What this does for Miami, I actually think it makes them better immediately because Bobby Portis is exactly the kind of player that they need next to Bam, in my opinion. A guy who can stretch the floor, get rebounds. I actually think that arguably is the biggest win. And Middleton has had so many big moments in Bucks history. He's just really expensive over the next couple of years. I believe he has one yet less year than Jimmy, if I'm not mistaken on this.
He does.
Um, and I think that they're concerned about his health. Okay. I mean, I know that they're concerned about his health. He has one less year or one more year, excuse me, than Jimmy, but
One
you
more.
get a 31.6 this year and then a player option at 34, which he likely opts into. But even if he doesn't, okay, like you still have the flexibility. And what you're doing is you're taking on money for Connaughton and Portis. But at the same time, what's interesting about this trade, Ethan, it actually thins out both teams financially. Both teams end up somehow like saving a couple of bucks long term on this. And like it's weird how this works out. But this is one, and if you're Milwaukee, you're going for broke. Like you're once again saying to Giannis, like, look at what we've done here. We have turned Middleton into Butler. Yes, we gave up Portis, but what do you think about that one? That's a straight 3 for 3. The Heat would then have a roster spot still available.
Well, the Middleton health thing is what concerns me. I will say Portis is a player that we've linked to him them before because you're right. He's more of a tradition. I mean, he's a stretch player. He hasn't been as efficient at times this year. I know there's been some frustrations with him up there. Connaughton, again, another player, better athlete than people sort of realize, would be a functional rotation player for them. But it's Middleton's injury issue, and it's the age. I get it with DeRozan. I know. I mean, DeRozan's older than Middleton, I believe, actually.
Yeah.
But it would keep them relatively competitive if Middleton is healthy, which is not the issue that you have with DeRozan. So I think that might be the thing that would give me some pause, considering we've talked so much about availability. And there is, there does seem to have been some decline with Middleton also that I don't think necessarily exists with DeRozan. I think the issue with DeRozan is more fit in that situation. But if you're just plugging him in for Jimmy and doing some of the same things that Jimmy did, they've made that fit work at least to a degree before.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, they become a
uh,
better shooting team. Middleton's a better distance shooter, I would
well,
think.
that
He's
is true. That is true.
two
There's a
years
little bit more.
younger.
There's a
And
little more range there, for sure. I guess I haven't watched Middleton play that much lately. I mean, he's
I
killed
just
it.
love him in big games. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So, like you talk about DeRozan in big games, they're actually the opposite. DeRozan's going to give you a max effort in the regular season to be
Mhm.
awesome. But if you get to the postseason, which, by the way, the secret part about all of this, seeding wise, the Heat are better this year than they've been in years past, which is the weirdest thing that
Yeah, I
they're
know.
out,
I
for
know.
now, at least, out of the play-in. Okay. So, those are the two guys that I
All
would
right,
look at. Go
all right.
ahead.
Before you go, because I want you to we're going to do the three-way stuff next.
Yeah, the players that I think that could they find a way to get by way of a three-way deal.
Okay, okay. Before we do, I gotta take care of a one-way sponsor here. All right, what we want to mention here? Better Edge. Use the code 5RSN. You get $20 to play right away. This is a legal sports marketplace. It's not a book. It's a marketplace. You're betting against others there, so you can find the line that you want. You also don't have to pay what's called VIG, which means you're not just giving it away to the house for free. So check it out, betteredge.com. Again, betteredge.com. Player contest there as well. Of course, football season's still going, and you can play everything NFL on there as well as NBA and the other sports. It's betteredge.com. Use the code 5RSN. All right, let's get back to it. We got Evan Cohen here. Of course, you can find him on ESPN Radio. You can also find him with the spreadsheet. I see. I've got my notes. I'm
All right,
trying
there
to
we
take
go.
everything down here. So we've got the realistic returns, the Houston and Memphis deals. You got a Jimmy build continuation with Sacramento, Milwaukee. What is our next category, sir?
All right, three-way deal. Could they get these guys?
Hmm.
So these are names that have been mentioned, but let's discuss them. Cam Johnson with the Nets is an
Hmm.
obvious age match fit with Bam and Tyler. He just makes a ton of sense. I think your flexibility is through the roof if you can get him by way of Bam and Cam and Tyler. I think Bam, by the way, side note, it's not working as a big offensively. I think it's time to consider watching some of the big three era if you're the
Hmm.
coaching staff and actually figuring out if he can be in the LeBron role, not the Bosh role.
Mm.
I think
Okay.
that I think that I would look at him more in the LeBron Jimmy point forward role.
Hmm.
There's not a wing that can guard him if he plays big. There's not a wing he can't guard. If you make him a wing, just on a side note, I just think that that is something to consider. Instead
Okay.
of trying to make him into Bosh,
Hmm.
make him into James.
Okay.
I
Okay.
don't think he's
It's
going to be able to do that, but I'm just saying that would be my.
I was gonna say he was 0 for 6 from the field yesterday, Evan. But
I
okay,
understand. I understand, but he doesn't feel like. I wonder if he
I know
changes.
I get it. Okay, all right. So Cam
Anyway,
Johnson. Go
so
ahead.
Cam Johnson, the Nets are not going to take Jimmy Butler in. There's no point of that. They would get him in free agency if need be. That
Right.
would be, you would need a third team, obviously, and I don't think they're necessarily going to be the team for Bradley Beal. I do have a couple of teams for Bradley Beal, which we can get to. So Cam Johnson. The other one that's really interesting and I think would actually fit them is Julius Randle. The problem is
Mhm.
the Timberwolves cannot aggregate contracts
Right.
because of the
Right.
fact that they are hard capped at that second
Mhm.
apron. So they would probably have to make trades prior to that, or
Mhm.
maybe be willing to give up players that I wouldn't expect them to give up. And then Brandon Ingram and Zion. So
Yeah.
that's really what I wanted to get to. To me, I think you start this if you're the Heat, even though I said the realistic returns, the players continue the Jimmy build. I think you exhaust every option to try to end up with Zion. And once you have done that, then you start the process. And I
Mhm.
am sure that that is probably what they're doing. They probably have that target list of guys that they
Mhm.
think if he's with us under that contract, especially with the weight stipulations, which I think is a good thing for the Heat in this case
Mhm.
with Zion, because they'll get him into that shape, obviously. That's where all of this to me should start. But then you have to give players, obviously, to the Pelicans that they would be interested in. And then you have to find a team for Jimmy that would give those players to the Pelicans. And
Mhm.
if you believe that Golden State is completely out, that's where I'm a little confused as to where those players are that the Pelicans would want. Now,
Right. Right.
now, there's a flip side of that.
Mhm.
Are you willing to take in bad contracts if you're the Heat? Because that's another way of getting it done. So if you want to
How
get
far how far out are those bad contracts going? I guess
two
that's the
years.
question.
I mean, that's
Okay.
CJ McCollum at this point.
Yeah. Right.
Like CJ, or if in a three-way deal, Zach LaVine. I mean, that's the other thing that they can consider as part of this. You want to get Zion, take a bad contract with him, and just say
Mhm.
screw it. Because if it hits on him, it doesn't matter on the other stuff. So it's just
Right.
something to think about, right? Are you willing to expand the deal to say, all right, Zion and CJ, and now it's Jimmy. Rozier needs to find a home there, and then Duncan probably has to go in that spot from a money
Mhm.
perspective. So let's
Mhm.
start there. Would you be willing to take on bad contracts? Because that's something that I have not heard talked about through all of this. To get the players you want, taking on a bad contract or two.
I mean, I would be if the player still has a chance to be productive for you in the interim. So if you're talking about somebody like CJ, who again I've always liked his game,
He had
clearly on the
50 last
decline.
night, right? Or whatever it
What's
was.
that?
He had
Uh,
50.
right. I mean, clearly, I would look at both those things. I mean, to me, it's funny you mentioned Zion because I've always felt he's going to end up in Miami one way or the other because I kind of feel like him being in Miami is the one way to
Like in
salvage his
Miami or on the
career.
Heat, because those are two different things.
Well, no, he's in Miami. There's no question about that. That's right. That is in the back of your mind. Although guys get to Miami one way or the other. You know what's funny about the whole thing about players playing in Miami is it's almost like they settle down more when they're here. When you're in it all the time,
Yeah.
you get used to it. It's the guys traveling into Miami that tend to be more of the problem, and they end up living here in the off season anyway. Everything is available in the off season that's here available during the season. So, I mean, yes, that would be in the back of my mind a little bit, but I've always felt that if you look at Pat's history, the fascination with the gifts of the player and Zion's gifts are unmistakable. It's an availability issue, but it's an availability issue for a different reason than Jimmy. The availability issue with Zion is basically just taking care of his body. If they fix that, I believe at least that he would want to play with Jimmy. It's not taking care of his body. He never worried about Jimmy being out for a while and not coming back in shape. That was not the issue. With Zion, the issue is different, but I feel like it's easier for them to manage than sort of Jimmy's inconsistency of personality, I guess. Um, and so it is something I would absolutely look at. I mean, Ingram also, and look, I know Griff a little bit. I know you do too. I just think if you're looking at his situation there, uh, I think he's going to want, good sort of early career vets that he can build with. And the question is, where do you get those right now? And I think that is the issue: is what would the third team look like there?
So, okay, so in this case, let's just walk through this. So this is important to note. So if you just do a straight two-team deal, which obviously I
Mhm.
don't think would happen, but it's important to note this by way of how this could get done. So Zion and CJ McCollum for Jimmy Butler, Duncan Robinson, and Josh Richardson works. Just that
Okay.
that deal works. So what that enables you to do if you're thinking about this, listening to this, is get Jimmy to a third team that may be interested in his services and get the Pelicans in return some players that they would want. I think
Hmm.
that's where maybe, Ethan, maybe that's where the Houston thing comes in. Because
Yeah.
maybe you look at that and say, how does a team like the Pelicans that is loaded with wings not get interested in Jabari Smith?
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
Even though he's not what maybe you thought he would be, how did they not get interested in a Cam Whitmore, right? In guys that you could look
Hmm.
at and say, all right, there's something there. Now, again, you have to look at the money part of it. So Steven Adams has to go somewhere in this, and then Dylan Brooks likely has to go somewhere in this. But I think that's where if the Heat are willing to take back a quote unquote bad contract, which for them, without Jimmy Butler, I don't know that CJ is a bad contract coming off the bench when they don't have scoring. And by the way, I know him a tiny bit, working with
Hmm.
him a little bit at ESPN. Class act, nicest
Oh
guy in
no,
the
he
league.
is. There's no,
So
there's
you're
no
never
question
going to
about
worry
that.
about anything else with him other than
No,
nice and kindness.
the funny, no, he's a great guy. The funny thing about CJ is my Tyler comp when he came into the NBA was CJ. I mean, he was a lot of people's too, not just his. And I do think that the two of them could share the backcourt together at times, and they could play down the stretch at times. Now, CJ's not the defender that I think you would want in a clutch playoff game, but again, in terms of what he would provide in terms of professionalism, they wouldn't have to worry about CJ and whether or not he cared about the game, cared about what was going on with the team, as they've had to kind of worry about some of this stuff lately. So no, I'm a CJ fan. That's not an awful. When we talk about bad contracts, there's a difference between getting a player who's really just not a functional player anymore, and then getting a player who's just overpaid or has a year more than he should have. If we're talking about that, then yes, if you can get a player with the kind of upside like Zion has
Yeah.
in
So
your
that would,
system, and you believe in your system, then that one makes some sense. Okay,
yeah.
so
And
those
that's, by
all.
the way, separately,
Hmm?
I may be nuts on this. Just on an island, put Zach LaVine on the Heat. I believe he becomes a good defender. Like I think he's built to be a good defender. I just don't think he's actually a good defender.
I agree with you. No, I've said that. I said the exact same thing. Physically, he should be a good defender. My
Correct.
concern with Zach has been his knees long term because he was a player that relied so much early in his career on athleticism, but he doesn't really rely on that anymore. And he has turned my opinion a little bit because his efficiency this year has been much better than it's been in the past. And he came in and played. And here's the thing: we know that Zach was not happy with a lot of things in Chicago. We know that. Just as Jimmy is not happy with some things in Miami, and Zach has played. He's played consistently and he's played well, even on a team that has been seemingly trying to replace him for a long time. All right, so those all the three ways, or do we have a
Yeah.
does it make
So
sense
Zion,
right now?
Brandon Ingram, Julius Randle, Cam Johnson. All right. So then I have the does it make sense? Okay. And this
Yes.
is two-way does it make sense? One for the Heat, one for the opposition.
Okay.
Does it make sense? Now, this is straight up clearing the books, filling positions and things of need. The players may not be exciting for you.
Hmm.
Trade them straight up to Chicago for Vucevic and Lonzo Ball. Vooch has
Hmm.
2 years left this year and next year. Lonzo's a free agent at the end of the year. If he was ever healthy, his skill set fits perfectly next to Tyler and what they're
Hmm.
looking for a point of attack defender.
Hmm.
As crazy as this sounds, considering the dad, I actually think he's a character guy. Like I think that the ball kids are all seemingly like not. I mean, no, I don't have LiAngelo's song in the background right now, but I think that Lonzo has shown you like he's willing to work and he doesn't
Yeah.
like so Vooch and Lonzo. I'm not sure that makes sense for the Heat, but positionally it does.
Uh, Pat's always like Lonzo. I know that. You're just talking about the health there. For a fit, we've talked about they need a player like Lonzo next to Tyler. But the question has always been, could it actually be Lonzo? I've been stunned by Vucevic's season this year. I thought he was kind of cooked. His numbers have been terrific. His ability to stretch the floor, I think, would help them also. I don't think that's an awful idea. Actually, I don't. Now, people have been looking at adding Vucevic while you had Jimmy, and then kind of rounding out this whole thing. If you're going to try to lean into Bam as the LeBron light, then
Yeah,
yes, this would make
very
some
light.
sense in this
Yeah,
case. Really, really light though, like
yeah.
really, really light. Um, I don't hate it, honestly. I don't hate it. I don't think it's the kind of deal that what's funny is like this deal, I think actually more Heat fans would like be accepting of than some of the others that you talked about, even if it doesn't make as much long-term sense. Just because again of the names and you plug them into the rotation. I mean, Vooch would start right away, and I think Lonzo would start next to Tyler, and so you'd basically be adding two starters, right? I mean, you'd be adding two starters with Bam. Tyler, and then I guess the other piece in that case, I
Yeah,
don't think
you got to go Hawkeyes. Just blindly go Hawkeyes at that point.
right. You can't start Jovic there, so then it would be Jaquez in this case, and that's a whole other story because of how much he has slid back this year. All right, so what else do you have on
All right.
doesn't make sense?
To Dallas for Clay, PJ Washington, and Daniel Gafford. Now they would need to add
Okay.
another piece because Miami doesn't have the two roster spots available in the 3-for-1, so they would have to add Richardson, let's say. I
Okay.
don't know why the Mavs would be excited to necessarily do that.
Well, PJ and Gafford are what got them over the top last year, so I would have a hard time seeing them do
And I
that.
don't, and I would not do it if I'm the Heat and I'm like if I well Maxi Kleber instead of Gafford. If I'm getting PJ Washington, I would consider it. I would Clay at this point in his career coming to Miami, I feel sad for him actually because
Yeah.
like that. But maybe you then flip Clay to a contender. So that's just a would they do it? Or does it make sense?
Mm.
Um,
I think that one would be unlikely for both sides. Although,
yep,
again, I could see the fit of PJ next to Bam. Gafford, but then you have Ware, and I kind of feel like you're trying to sort of create what Dallas had
with Lively.
with them, and then you've got Ware and you've got Gafford there, and it feels like now you're overloading at a certain spot when you kind of want to clear the path for Ware. So I don't feel that one as much. I feel like the Chicago one would be more of it's just a cleaner fit
Yes.
rotation wise and everything else even before we get even into the cap.
All right. I got two more quick categories here.
Okay.
Um, would they ever?
Okay.
Would they ever engage in Philly and make it a three-way deal
Hmm.
with Paul George potentially going to the Warriors?
Who they've looked at before.
And if they and by the way, if I'm the Heat, I'm willing to give up a first if I'm getting Jared McCain back.
So that's your target.
Well, I love Jared McCain as a player for them.
Mm.
I don't think Philly would be excited to do that, obviously. I think the concept of the Warriors then moving Wiggins and Kuminga, again, the scary part for me with Kuminga is the Heat would then have to extend him. And then
That's
what
my problem
happens?
with it.
Yeah, and
That's
by
my
the way,
problem.
not at their price. Because
No.
inevitably he becomes a restricted free agent, he signs an offer
Mm.
with the Nets, and then what are you going to do with
And
him?
also, this is a team that's trying to move away from the mid-range. I know we talked about DeRozan also, but one of the issues with Kuminga and Golden State has been that he's shot too many mid-ranges for Kerr's taste. The McCain things. I'm just trying to look at Philadelphia's perspective on this. I mean, to me, look, obviously Paul's been awful there.
Right. So
I,
Paul George goes to the Warriors. The Warriors package for Jimmy still goes to the Heat, but they get Paul George instead. And you're working on other, maybe Caleb can get back in the mix. So you have to look at that as big
Mhm.
picture. That's a mega deal. The other
And
one,
so they would get Caleb back for half the price that they were willing to pay him. Yeah, I mean, I suppose. Again, this would also have to be Embiid, basically. Does Embiid have the leverage in Philadelphia right now to
he
tell them to go
shouldn't.
get Jimmy? It doesn't feel like it.
He should not. And by the way, neither should Maury. Like, I don't understand how
No, I
Maury
know, I
gets
know.
a
No, he
pass on
he
that.
has Evan. He
I mean,
has the biggest pass, and you know the reason he's got a pass with the media. It's because he
yeah.
sits with him at Sloan. I this is Anyway, my
I don't
thoughts on
understand. And then
Arrow.
people are saying Pat Riley shouldn't be in charge of the Heat. They've been to seven NBA finals in the last 20 years. I'm a big believer in this. If you want to present me
Mhm.
a problem, fine, present me a solution. So every single person that says Pat Riley should be gone, tell me who should be in charge of the team instead of him. because half those people have never heard of Adam Simon. So they're not
Right.
going to tell me that,
Well,
right?
the people who the point is the people who would be in charge if Pat is totally decided. Pat does not make every decision now. This is a group decision that they make. They've got about six or seven people who have an influence in it, and Pat has not always made the final decision. He has deferred to others on this stuff. But the idea, again, if Pat walks, they're not going to go get somebody else. It's going to be promoted from the people that Pat has basically groomed. So it's a non-argument, but it's the thing about Mamori that gets me on a whole side subject because I don't know what he's won. I keep coming back to
Nothing,
this, and yet
nothing.
he's given this sacred cow status. Okay,
Uh,
I think it's unlikely the Philadelphia thing. Um,
Okay,
I
here's
don't think
another
it's a
would they
problem
ever.
with sending Jimmy there. I just think it's
Yeah, it
unlikely.
would have to be a three-way deal. Paul George would have to go somewhere else,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Would they ever engage with the Knicks?
Send him directly back to Tibbs. What are you trying to get?
So the question becomes whether or not you think that Bridges would become too expensive for you at some point in New York.
Mhm.
Because remember, he's extension eligible. Now, do you
Right.
assume that he just, or he's going to be, do you assume he's going to take less because Brunson took less? Like, I don't know. Do you think he's an up there? He's an upgrade over Bridges? Do you think he gets you closer to a title now? And there has to be many other pieces involved there. I mean, is OG the guy? He's under contract for 200 and something million dollars, $36 million
Mhm.
a year for the next 5 years, 4 years. He's certainly you put OG in
I
there.
love OG. I would love OG
Me
in
too.
the Heat system. But the thing about from the Knicks perspective is the thing about it from the Knicks perspective is you just traded all of this for Mikal.
Oh, I know.
And then
I know.
you're gonna cash that in on 35-year-old plays two-thirds of the time Jimmy Butler. And that also depends on Tibbs's sway there because and does Tibbs want to coach him again? I don't know. I mean, it
Probably
didn't
not.
end
Probably
well in
not. Good point.
Minnesota. So I know has affection for him personally, but I don't know.
Okay. Then the last two,
Mhm.
and these are under do we believe?
Do we believe? Yes.
Do we truly believe Golden State is out?
No, I don't believe they're totally out of it, but I do know that it was overstated, their interest in him, even before these reports came out. I know that because I thought that was the cleanest fit to start, Evan, just from a direction of their franchise. They have a guy who is approaching his late 30s. They want to give him one more chance. They certainly don't want an end with him like other teams have had with their stars, right? They want Steph to finish there. It's clear. So, and getting him somebody like Jimmy from a play style standpoint, if you're going to be slowing down later in your career, you want a guy who can be effective at that pace, right? So, and Jimmy can obviously do that. That's what he does best. But I also come back to this. I mean, Kerr literally was with Spo this summer.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've heard you say that. It's an interesting point. Very
Yeah, I mean,
interesting.
Jimmy just threw the best coach in the league under the bus. Okay, and obviously, Steve, Steve has his detractors, but he's won a lot of stuff out there. I don't know. I mean, we're gonna try to do with Jimmy what Spo just couldn't. I have a hard time kind of wrapping my mind around that. Um, I don't think they're totally out because again, at any point when you have a star like Curry, who is we're really talking about Bron Curry and KD in this generation. If you have a star like Steph, and and by the way, he's been the one who's stayed. Okay, he's been the one who's stayed. So if you have a star like that and he walks in there and says, "Go get me help." I do believe that it's as quick as this that they could change their minds on it. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to believe Golden State's totally out until they are. But all the signs that I've heard of behind the scenes are that with the report that came out that at least at this moment they're not.
Okay. My last one. Do we believe that there's no suitor for Bradley Beal? Because I think there could be two, maybe
I'd be
three.
curious to see who you think it is because I'm going to guess one because I was talking to Alex and Brady about this last night. Uh, do you think Orlando could be one?
That's not on my list, but I like that thought.
Okay.
That's an interesting one. I don't love some of the pieces that Orlando would then give up to Miami in this
Hmm.
because I'm not excited about Jonathan Isaac.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know
uh,
that he would be excited about Jonathan Isaac in some ways. I
yeah.
know as far as being a defender, but I don't know about the culture fit there. But yeah,
Okay.
that I've thought of him too, obviously, because he is an elite defender. He would fit
No
in
question. No
in their
question.
system in that way. But we know the other stuff there.
Yeah. So the two I have,
Hmm.
the first one would be Chicago, played for Billy D,
Hmm.
obviously, in college. Chicago would have contracts that maybe they'd be willing to get off of in this spot that they
Hmm.
like better in terms of if they can get rid of multiple contracts.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So if you look at like for instance, Vooch has 2 years, Levine has 3 years.
Okay.
Beal has 3 years at 7 million more than
Hmm.
Levine. So, but then you're clearing the 20. I think that you'd have to get paid off to do it. I think Phoenix has to give whatever draft capital they would have left to
They
the
don't have
incoming
much,
team.
as you know. They have
Yeah,
very
but I
little.
think they have a 2031 first and then draft swap rights this year, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken.
Yeah.
So there is something that they could do potentially in that. The other team is where he's been. But again,
Washington.
yeah, the bad contract thing. So, if the Heat could get Kuzma,
Hmm.
and I mean I would want Brogdon,
Yeah.
and then would you take on Jordan Poole?
Wow.
Now hold on, hold on. I'm gonna sweeten this for you a little bit.
Okay. You're gonna need to.
Yeah, well, there's a big sweetener for you, and I know what it is.
Mm.
So let's just say, for argument's sake, I'm not saying I would do this. I'm thinking aloud on this.
Hmm.
The Heat would get Kuzma, Brogdon, and Jordan Poole. The Suns get Jimmy. The Wizards get Beal, Terry Rozier, and Josh Richardson.
So you're getting off of Terry's contract.
You get one more year of Poole has an additional year after that.
How do you think Poole has played this year? I'm curious because when I look at the numbers, they don't look awful. They're not. It's not contributing to winning in any
You know
way,
what's
but I
interesting
don't know
about
that
him?
any
You
good.
know what's interesting about him? He has high scorer on bad team written all over him. Yet the
Mhm.
best years were winning championships. Like so, it's weird.
Right.
Like,
Right.
if we believe the Heat are going to be lacking scoring, that is one thing that guy does. Like they don't have anyone. They haven't had someone for years, it feels like, where it's like, oh crap, down 12 in the second quarter. Can you just like Cam Thomas style? Can you just throw up 100 shots and try to
That's
get
what
this
they. I
thing?
think that's what they wanted Terry to do, but
Right, but that
it,
hasn't
ha-
worked, obviously.
it hasn't worked out.
But if you think about Brogdon and Kuzma, and there may be some real life stuff that maybe Kuzma wouldn't fit with the team. Um,
I'll let you handle that.
I didn't say anything. I'm just saying
Okay.
there may be, there may not be. Theoretically, from a basketball perspective, if healthy, if you
Mhm.
have Brogdon, Hero, Kuzma, Bam, and Kalel at some point,
Right.
or Jovic in there, you're
Here's the
scoring.
thing about Kuzma. We talk about guys and being on bad teams.
He won a
Kuzma
title
was
too.
what would you say? Was he the third best player or the fourth best player on a championship team? He was. I know it was an
Third.
odd championship team, but he was their third scorer, right? I mean, he's their
Yeah,
third
I mean,
scorer.
yeah, he worked with LeBron and AD, and obviously, if you're going
Huh?
to be able to hang with LeBron, you're going to be able to hang with others. Like that seems like one of those guys who's going to be better with structure. Like put him with the
Mhm.
Heat, he's going to be better. I'm just saying, like that's why I put it under. Do we believe? Do we believe that there's like Bradley Beal? There's no one that would want him.
I mean, I've obviously had to shoot all that stuff down because the idea that the Heat would take on that contract
Well,
was
that's why I
absolutely
did not put him on the Heat. I
no,
have
I
no
said
interest in
was
doing that.
was was ludicrous. But no, I could see it. I mean, I guess Washington could sell it as him coming home. I don't even know what they're trying to sell in Washington right now. So you're right. It's just getting off of these deals that they've made and trying
And
to
getting
move
picks.
forward with it. Essentially, you're giving him the deal that you traded away. Now, also here's the other thing though. Beal would have to waive his no trade, right? So that's part of this
That's
too.
why I tried to be very specific on the spots that he went,
Uh-huh.
meaning if he still wants to be around the DC area or if he wants to play for Billy D close to home in St. Louis. I guess the other one you could always say the Lakers because the Lakers
Right.
do have a bunch of guys that I think the Heat would want. I don't know if the Heat would want them for Jimmy Butler though.
Right. Right. Right.
Rui,
You think it connects? You're thinking
yeah,
that's
but
one
I
of
don't even think the Heat would be able to get him. But let's just say, okay,
the.
connect.
Mhm.
Rui, Gabe Vincent. I mean, you want to do a straight up Lakers? I mean, do you think the Lakers would trade for Jimmy?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so then we could do
Oh,
that.
I no, absolutely. It's the first thing. LeBron loves him. I mean, just loves it, and I mean, just loves his mentality, all this kind of stuff. And Jimmy, it would work there at least. I mean, it would be a circus, of course. Now even more so, and it would be 24/7. on your network there about that team. But well, if it's 20, I think it's 23-6 right now or something like that. But it's also the idea again of him being in that kind of market. When you talk about a guy who's been, the commercials, all the other, I think Jimmy would be thrilled with it. I think Braun would be thrilled with it. I don't know about the basketball fit necessarily.
All right, I
Um,
have it for you. Here's the
all
deal.
right, go ahead.
Jimmy, Josh, and Alec Burks to the Lakers. Which, by the way,
Hmm.
Josh and Alec Burks, if healthy, I think the Lakers could use, as odd as that
Yes.
sounds.
Well, definitely Alec for sure. Yes.
Rui, Gabe Vincent, Jared Vanderbilt, who I love, but he's got a lot of years left.
Hmm.
Max Christie, who's played very well for them this year,
Hmm.
and Dalton Connect.
I kind of like Christie in the right system if over time. And Connect, obviously, I think they would have interest in. It's interesting. I'd have to process that one. You're right, though. They certainly could use Burks. I think the Lakers would be motivated to do this. The question is with the Heat. I don't know.
I mean, that's the question. Yeah, because then are they going to factor in the emotion of, are we giving LeBron another title and are we giving Jimmy a title?
I know. I know.
And that should not, by the way, then I'll finish with this, because this is the
Mhm,
question I was thinking about for you. I told you to start. I love studying the management and the structure and things like
mhm.
that, how people develop, right? Like, and by the way, pat yourself on the back for all the people that you've hired that have developed extremely well. Um, when Belichick found Brady, he didn't give two you know whats about where Bledsoe went, and in fact was like, cool, trade him in division. I'll beat him twice a year, no big deal,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? Are the Heat operating as if they're a championship team and they need to keep Jimmy away from some places, or they just need to get a great return?
I think it's more the return this time. I don't think the petty will be at quite the level it was with Braun. I've told this story before, but Norris Cole was when LeBron went to Cleveland and basically Cleveland was trying to get Norris when they had a deal that he were going to trade Norris, and when Pat found out that Norris was going to end up with helping LeBron, he killed the three-way both times. Uh,
At that point, I love it, but now I don't know that
Right, but
he in that
but
spot.
now, I don't think the petty will be. I don't think the issue will be okay. We're giving him to another team that we're competing with. I don't think necessarily that they're thrilled with Jimmy right now. I think we know that. I don't think they want to hand him a championship at this stage. But I also think this is about return at this stage, and I think it again is about return and timeline of return. And that's all the things I can't believe the job you've done. This is just ridiculous.
You
But
asked me to come on. I'm not going to do
I
this half-assed.
you know what I said? I said, Larry, I'll keep you for 20. We're at 51.
I have
Yeah,
more. I have more I want to cover you with.
I know you have more. I know you
I
have
should
more.
go to
But
my daughter's basketball game at some point.
and I have to pick up my daughter as well. So maybe we should bring our daughters into this, and we should
Yeah.
have them.
All right, there we go.
We're not putting our daughters in the trade machine, though. I promise you. That's the one thing neither of us.
I get a future first. No, I'm just kidding. Although I don't know, after listening to your pod last night, would you put your daughter on the trade machine if it meant Terry went out with her?
All right, it's been great having Evan Cohen here on the podcast. You can follow him at what is it? What's the exact? Is it
EFCO
just Evan
Radio.
Cohen? Okay, there you go.
EFCO Radio on Twitter.
All right, that's all we need. EFCO Radio. Man, this was fun. All right, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Alex is going to be upset about two things here. He's going to be upset about two things. One is he's got to compress this file after I send it to him because I did it on Zoom. I don't even think I turned the mic on properly. And two, like this is all the shit that he wanted to do. But I knew there was no chance of him getting up this morning. And if he was on here, we'd be on here for 3.5 hours.
Imagine if he gets traded to a team we haven't mentioned. I think we've mentioned every team in the league. Atlanta's the other sleeper one that I had.
Okay, we're gonna go.
Yeah,
I'm not
but
trading. I'm not trading my daughter. She's off the table. I'm gonna put out a statement here. Okay, I'm not trading my daughter. Okay, Ethan Skolnick will not be trading Sasha Skolnick
brings you
anywhere. Though
joy.
I'm sure
It
I'm
brings you
sure your
joy.
daughter is lovely, but I feel like they're both in the proper situations right now. All right, I
Brilliant.
gotta go. Ev, enjoy the basketball game, the other basketball game, and take your spreadsheet with you. Thanks, man.
Thank you.